Welcome to the Bleeding Goat podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Basilisk. The Basilisk entry is pretty darn good. It gives you a description of how you might come to know you're in Basilisk territory. It covers that they can be domesticated and trained. It gives the monster a weakness to be uncovered, and it also informs how they're used in commerce. So overall, it's a really well-rounded entry. The monster manual starts out with a quote that states, "No one makes statues of frightened warriors. If you see one, keep your eyes closed and your ears open." That's a pretty good point, and it's again mentioned in the blurb later on, where that if you come across something like a lifelike stone carving in the wilderness with body parts chewed off, you best be wary because a basilisk is likely near. What makes this such a great detail is it doesn't just give characters a hint about the monsters itself. I mean, it does that, it can turn you into stone. Rather, it also makes the environment its own danger. Your characters aren't going to walk around forever with their eyes closed, so every cave twist or turn is just filled with a tiny bit of risk. The book says that basilisks are adaptable hunters, and they exist in arid, temperate, tropical climates, and that they need to chase prey because their gaze can turn a creature itself into stone. But this is something of a joke. The basilisk is a medium creature with a movement speed of 20 feet. They're not chasing anything. It has a dex of 8, but that's a -1 modifier, but it still rocks 15 AC, entirely due to natural armor. This basilisk has way less to do with the real-world lore and more to do with the Warhammer 40k artillery unit. Basilisks, therefore, are lair creatures, as the book says. They're more like frogs or crocodiles. They wait for their prey to come close enough, and then they strike with surprise using their gaze attack. The gaze attack itself is interesting because it's not only functional, but it works very narratively. If you can see the basilisk, then it can use its gaze attack to turn you to stone. And if you fail, you're restrained and begin to turn to stone. You don't actually finish turning to stone until you roll another save at the start of your turn. So if you go back to the quote at the beginning, now you can see why the statues are frightened. They have time to process what's happening. They are turning to stone. It's not, in a second, boom. The entry for the basilisk also states that you can use the basilisk's own gaze against it. Specifically, you can startle a basilisk. A basilisk in bright daylight can see its reflection, and then when it does, it uses its gaze attack to target itself, or it does so at least once until it's no longer startled. Simply put, that's a great tidbit, very useful to reward your players with proper preparation. Let's go back to the part where the book says that a basilisk can use its gaze attack, because it turns out that's very intentional. A basilisk can be domesticated, and therefore its eggs are highly prized. So far, everything about the basilisk, the lore, its abilities, it works together pretty darn seamlessly. The thing is for me that this makes the basilisk feel far less terrifying and more like a top-notch guard dog. We're talking about a creature that lives underground or a cave, some kind of lair, and it likely has its back against the wall with a minimal movement speed, 20. It doesn't have a climb or a burrow speed, and its gaze attack can simply be avoided if the players, look away. Once combat starts, the only thing the characters have to overcome is the disadvantage of being blinded. So here's the thing, the threat of a basilisk is far more terrifying than the basilisk itself. It's like a witch's beware of dog sign. People without dogs put those up just to, warn people off. So a crafty hermit might also set out statues with a couple of, nibbled marks to spook people. In contrast, a wizard who is actually trying to catch someone or kill them as they came into their tower would never want you to know that they have one. Unless, of course, letting you know they had one was exactly the point. Any adventurer is going to want a basilisk, right? Because all monsters become infinitely easier. And therefore, illusions or glamours of basilisks should be ubiquitous. The risk of being wrong about an illusory basilisk is just too great. However, there's a reason not to play basilisk this way, and it's mostly because when the threat of something is omnipresent, we just get over it as a society, right? Just look at COVID. But there's just also another reason, right? Which is it creates far more mystery in the world. There's a reason the History Channel stopped airing documentaries in favor of whatever far-fetched trash that they currently air these days, and it's just because it's flat out exciting and entertaining. So I think we should agree that the suggestion of a basilisk is far more terrifying than something that is regularly hunted on a splunking and noodling weekend. If nobody knows what a basilisk looks like, then nobles and wizards can just say it's a basilisk, right? They walk around with a blindfolded, ferocious, shaved dog, and a couple prestidigitation tricks later, and voila, they have a basilisk, right? It keeps the people in line. And frankly, this version of events meshes far better with our own historical accounts of basilisks. Pliny the Elder wrote of Basilisk, the king of serpents, 2,000 years ago in his work Natural History. That's got to be pretty humorous. And aside from petrification, the majority of the details relate to nothing in the D&D monster manual. So here's the thing, you have to ask yourself, how well known is the information in the monster manual? To the characters, the factions, races, professions, whatever. And chiefly, you should answer whether or not a role always rewards players with factual game mechanic information. When we fudge this clarity, the blending of reliable and unreliable information allows us to convey meaningful information while not divulging game mechanics. For example, Basiliscus means king-like because the basilisk is the king of serpents. So sure, a basilisk is a monstrosity, not a beast, but it behaves and can be found wherever you would reptiles. And Basiliscus, a species of lizard, is named so because of its pronounced finned, parietal blade apparently, on its head like a crown. So we can expect that our own basilisk might have some specific markings, and in D&D it does. It has spikes along its head and back. And we can say that a basilisk spits venom, like a spitting cobra, to cause blindness, which tells our players to protect their eyes, even though it's actually a gaze attack. No matter what, we need to, as storytellers, remember two things. One, the basilisk is a monster of lore well known in our real world. So we need to give our players the opportunity to know what the word and the monster means in our world. Two, the basilisk encounter itself can quickly devolve into one where I close my eyes and I swing at it. For these reasons, we want to keep some mystery about the basilisk, and the fight works best if the basilisk can use the element of surprise and its terrain to keep the pressure on the players. Harry Potter is actually exemplary for this very thing, making uses of the shadows and the noises, tunnels, and the role reversal of blinding the basilisk, yet Harry Potter himself is too weak to immediately capitalize on any of these things. So even though he has greater speed against a blinded opponent, those dead ends keep Harry from getting away. The last thing we're going to cover is the effects of petrification itself, and yes, a greater restoration spell will undo those effects, but the book says that the basilisk turns its victims to stone so it can eat them. It uses its powerful jaws to bite off the stone, and should the effects of petrification be lifted from the character, the removed parts don't come back, so hopefully whatever was removed wasn't your head. The most interesting bit though is that when the stone enters into the basilisk's mouth, its glands secrete some kind of fluid that turn the stone back into flesh, and that's how the basilisk digests the stone, is it actually turns into flesh. And so people in the know can properly handle these fluids and oils to be made into some kind of revivification, greater restoration potion that removes the petrification. Yet another awesome, useful bit in the basilisk entry that makes the monster really come to life. Just keep in mind what the book doesn't say about restoration, and that is that there isn't any aging or ill effects to the victim. Essentially, basilisk petrification is less damaging than Han Solo in Carbonite, right? At least there he was blind and shaky when he got restored. No, you're just instantly back. So there are far-reaching consequences for that kind of restoration, that the petrification is basically a form of cryosleep. And so any high-ranking noble with an illness might make use of this. Any doctor might induce the petrification as a way of inducing a coma in the modern world. Humans might use it simply to keep the best leaders and warriors available for time of urgency. We know that China's first emperor was buried with a bunch of terracotta warriors, but all those warriors in this kind of D&D world could simply be petrified and waiting to be restored. In sum, the Basilisk entry gives us a lot, and it doesn't even need any kind of screen time as a monster to be effective to our storytelling. We should be lucky if all the entries in the monster manual were this good, so enthusiastic 2 thumbs up.